Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal, the New Normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, here trying to, make the world seem a little more normal. Does it ever really happen? No. Is it going to happen tonight? Maybe a little. Maybe a little. This is one of those special episodes I like to do. But let me introduce my guest first. My guest tonight is Michael Hession, MD and author. Honored to have you, Michael. How you doing tonight?
Very good, Jeremy. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, my pleasure. This is, it's a paranormal show, but I also end up on the science rankings on Good Pods for some reason. So every once in a while, I like to throw in a more scientific episode.
Okay.
So it works. And people seem to like these ones, and I like learning about this stuff. So this type of specialties. So let's have some fun with it. First things first, though. Well, normally I ask what got people into the, but yeah, okay. What made you get more into the spiritual side of life than you were earlier in life? I guess that's the best way I could ask you this question.
Good. It's a good question. Basically, it was my near-death experience in 2014. I had a cold right before Christmas, and it just kept getting worse. Saw my doctor. I had a simple pneumonia, was prescribed antibiotics, and nothing worked. I kept getting worse. And on December 31st, 2013, I woke up struggling to breathe. My wife had already been awakened by my breathing, and my wife was a nurse, and we both knew that I was in trouble. And 911 was called, and I was brought to the emergency room of the hospital that I'd worked at for decades. And in the emergency room, the X-ray showed that the pneumonia had now involved all lobes of both lungs, and I had what's referred to as acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. Now I think since COVID, it's kind of referred to as cytokine storm, and that I needed to be put on life support. And I was intubated, placed in the ICU, but was not really responding to the intervention. And they told my wife that I was dying, and that my best chance of survival was to be transferred into one of the Boston hospitals to be placed on ECMO, which is an artificial lung that takes over when your lungs can't adequately exchange the oxygen into your blood. At some point during this time actually ceased to be a dimension. Once I was placed on life support, there was no way of knowing what time of day it was, what day it was. But I remember at one point hearing some heavily accented words, and they were familiar words. In fact, what's happening, I was being given the last rites, usually given to people who are seriously ill or dying. And I knew I had been in trouble, but that really kind of like was a shock to hear.
Yeah.
And then sometime later, I can't quantify the time, I could feel myself floating in darkness, and I could hear crying in the background, and it's very intense. And I still kept getting pulled into this black void, and I was able to look back, and I saw the tear-stained faces of my wife and my children and my brothers and sister. And then my body became cold, and I could no longer see them or hear them. At some point, I became aware of a light, uh, and as I drew closer to it, took on the appearance of a woman with a white gown and bright light around her, and it was a feeling of warmth that emanated from her, and made my body, which was at that time very cold, begin to warm up. And at that point, she made a comment that stuck with me forever. Is Michael, it's not your time. You must go back. You have much work to do. And then shortly thereafter, again, it's hard to quantitate the time because it wasn't really a dimension for me.
Of course.
My wife said, the doctor said you're getting better. And then from then on, I just, it was a long slog on life support, very painful, very stressful. And then when I was finally weaned off the ventilator and life support after about 11 days, they realized I was paralyzed. From the neck down, I developed Guillain-Barré as a complication of the viral pneumonia. And I was not able to be sent home. And they sent me to a rehabilitation hospital. And after a couple of weeks there, a friend of mine and his wife visited me. And my wife was there too. And they talked about the prayers that were said for me when I was admitted to the hospital and told that I wasn't going to live. And there was one thing that really kind of struck me. He said at the time I was sent into Boston for the ECMO, they called the University of Notre Dame with this young girl he'd gone to, graduated from, and asked them to have prayers said to me at the grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes. And it struck me at that time that was what the vision that I saw looked like. And that has been a very powerful spiritual feeling that I've been left with, and it stays with me even now.
That is a miraculous story and a heartbreaking one all in one, kind of. I couldn't help but even shed some tears over that. That's harrowing. My hat's off to you for being able to go through all that and still be as strong as you are today. That's miraculous. So, of course, the first question I have that comes out of this is, what do you think the lady in white possibly was? Did you have a lot of NDE experiencers I've talked to, they had like this just intuition in their head when they're talking something like that they know what it is. Like did you have that, or is it still kind of mystery who this lady in white was?
It was a complete mystery. I really, there was so much happening to me at that time, and I couldn't see, I couldn't speak. All I could do was, the only sense I had was hearing. So I could hear bits and pieces of what was being said, and I knew I was in grave peril, that my chances of surviving were less than 50%. I wasn't really sure what I had seen. And at the time, I wasn't even sure whether I had hallucinated it. It wasn't until later when I was in the rehabilitation hospital and heard these stories of all the prayers that were been said on my behalf, and particularly at the grotto at Notre Dame to Our Lady of Lourdes, that it kind of struck me that I had seen that before. When my son was looking at colleges, I had taken him out to Notre Dame, and we had seen that as part of the campus tour. And there's no real scientific explanation that I can give, other than the only thing I could conclude was that this was a spiritual thing that happened. And I guess either you have faith or you don't have faith. And if you don't have faith, then it was, a random event. But the juxtaposition of the timing and my having turned the corner when the story had been presented as being fairly bleak that I was going to survive, it just seemed to be too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Which I get. I mean, there's definitely, in my beliefs at least, fate and destiny in this world, which underlies basically every other belief system in the world, because there has to be some kind of, I mean, it's funny that not funny, but ironic that you mentioned that you were not in the dimension to really understand time when all this is happening, because that's exactly how it would work if destiny and fate are doing their things at the same time. They would be basically taking you out of the equation for a few moments, whatever you want to call them, to do what they have to do to make sure that you go back into it when you're supposed to go back into it. I mean, it's all kind of predetermined in my mind. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I mean, are you a believer in fate and destiny?
I think so. Yes, I think that there are a lot of unexplainable things that happen that I've seen as a physician, um, and they're not easily categorized. And I think it could be simply said it wasn't your time, or it could be that it was fate or destiny had something else in store for you. But there was a definite supernatural, spiritual force at play here.
Which there usually is when it comes to NDEs. It's usually every single one I've heard. It's beyond medical comprehension what happened or why this disease didn't take this person like it usually would. There's usually some outside element that no one can quite put their finger on, nor are we supposed to. In some ways, I guess, at least yet. But so after, well, actually, okay. What were your belief systems like before all this happened? Were you a religious man before all this happened, or?
Yes, I was. Still am. Even more so now.
Huh. Well, I can see why. I find it hard to believe anybody would be a little bit more religious after an experience like that. It kind of makes you see things from a new perspective. But after this experience, you decided to write a book, did you not?
Yes, I did. Not right away. The events like happened to her in 2014 and 2015, but it was in January of 2020 during the pandemic, where everything was shut down. Restaurants were closed, symphony was closed, museum was closed. Basically, had a lot of time on my hands. Patient visits were made virtual, um, unless they needed to be like in the emergency room. They were quite ill, but uh, life rapidly changed into something I had never experienced before. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and I had a habit that I started when I was in high school of journaling. Not really um, a diary, but what I would do is if I had thoughts or um, things that were making me curious, I would write them down. And I found those journals when I was cleaning, and after one night watching the news, and it was a rather compelling story of a young man who had COVID pneumonia, was on life support, for quite a long, close to 2 weeks, and ECMO, and he was eventually discharged, but he was really struggling, and I thought that even though I couldn't directly help any people by sharing my story of how you can overcome what is seemingly an impossible situation to recover from, how you can restore meaning and purpose in your life and find happiness again, would be a story worth telling. I try to normalize it. I speak as both a patient and a physician, and I navigate between both worlds and really try to normalize a lot of what happened to help people, to get them share some of the strategies that I use to help recover from a critical medical illness.
I mean, and that's an honorable thing to do, to want to help other people get through the same kind of situations you went in. And I think the pandemic gave a lot of people opportunities to do something that they never really saw themselves doing before. I mean, it was truly a different time that no one, at least older than a child, like ever experienced in their lives. It really did change the world. It was interesting times, that's for sure. I don't think I ever went that long without leaving the house in my life. But So, how did all these experiences change your perspective on life and your approach to medicine, being a doctor?
Well, there were a lot of strategies that I I learned when I was in rehabilitation. In addition to learning the basic things like how to swallow again, how to use my hands, how to walk. Every day was a tedious, multiple hours of physical therapy. It was a long ordeal. Um, but one of the things they recommended that I do is dealing with the stress was to try to meditate. And I tried some meditation apps and did some reading on books by John Kabat-Zinn, and and started a practice of mindfulness meditation. And what that did is it taught me to be a better listener. I think it's no secret that patients frequently complain that they get interrupted by their doctors when they're telling their story, and I think there's quite a difference, between sympathy and empathy. I think when you've been
Mm.
through something like what I went through, you can listen in a very different manner to what a patient is telling you about their problems. And you also learn the practice of noting. So if a random thought comes into your mind, rather than sort of blurting it out, you just put it back to be discussed at a later time. So I think it made me definitely a better listener, more empathetic listener, and in a very weird way, made me help become a better physician. There's nothing you could study to prepare you for this, but I think the whole experience of what I went through made me a better person and a better physician.
I mean, I could see, I could see why though, because I have to agree. I mean, physicians nowadays are so overbooked. So many of them are full, and you can't even get in to see them on a regular basis. And when you're with them, it seems like they're in and out of the room in like 5 minutes flat, if that even. Like it's just the American medical state has gotten to a sad. It's gotten sad. I mean, you go to hospital ERs now, you have to wait 12 hours sometimes to be seen on a busy night. Like it's just, I don't know. I've become very lackluster with it in the last year and a half to 2 years. It just seems like it's. I mean, it's kind of sad when going to an urgent care gives you like the most attention that you need for whatever's going on with you at that moment. Then trying to book an appointment with your regular physician.
You're absolutely right. I think it's a problem with no easy solution. I think the pandemic led to about, I, in the literature that I've read, close to 20% of the physicians and nurses have retired early. That it took a tremendous toll on people. They were dealing, nonstop, working double shifts. No matter what they did, the patients would die. We didn't know how to treat this illness, and it was a very it was essentially like combat medicine. Temporary tents were set up, temporary morgues were set up, and unfortunately, it takes many, many years to train physicians and nurses, and so there's hasn't been enough time really to train a new cohort of young physicians and nurses to take the place of those that retired early because of the pandemic.
Yeah, which I mean, that is what I've actually is what I've been told at a lot of hospitals. So it's that same exact scenario, and I get it. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's logical. It just is kind of, I don't know. It seems like I mean, honestly, there is no solution to it because what are you going to do? You can't rush people going through medical school. That'd be dangerous. So I mean, it would just what can you do? I mean, there's only so many licensed doctors in the United States alone, let alone the world. I mean, and the population keeps growing and growing. So even if you open more hospitals, even if you open more doctors' offices, there's not going to be the people to fill them, which is the problem.
It's a real societal problem with no easy solutions. I think people are taking some innovative approaches. Um, One of the things that is being looked at is what's called hospital at home, where patients who were low acuity but needed hospitalizations. Rather than being admitted, they're sent home, and the hospital supplies monitoring, has twice a day visits by EMTs or nurses and physical therapists to see them. And rather interesting thing happened. These patients are sick, elderly, frail, but they have a far lower 30-day readmission rate than people actually admitted to the hospital. I'm not sure anybody really fully understands that, but it's been seen in most hospital systems that are trying this hospital at home. So in many ways, I think being cared for at home is healthier than being in a hospital. Um, it was what was done years ago before it was felt that everybody needed to be in a hospital for every little thing. Doctors would make house calls, people were cared for at home. It was only really the sickest of the sick, people needing an operation, that would be in the hospital. So I'm not sure how it's all going to, get better, other than people are looking at very innovative ways to try and, improve upon the delivery of healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as people getting healing more at home, I mean, that kind of makes me think, like, well, my first thought is it because there's less new germs and bacteria at home than there would be at a hospital? I mean, it's all familiar stuff at your house that your body's used to.
I think there are a lot of concerns about hospital-acquired infections, people getting confused by different surroundings, and they fall because they're used to, when they wake up, going to the bathroom, where they remember the bathroom in their home, but in the hospital, it's not quite so easy. So things can happen that impact, patients' health and well-being. And I think what's happening now is an attempt to rectify what you're talking about. It does seem rather crazy that the only way you can get care now is through an urgent care setup rather than seeing your doctors, because the doctors are inundated with new patients to see, and not as though they're not working. It's just that how we provided care has really substantially become inundated with patients that need immediate attention, and the ones that need urgent attention, really there's no space for them to be seen. It's a lack of staff, which is a problem that no one has any simple answers for, as you pointed out.
I mean, exactly. I mean, you can. it's it's not like, say, in the army where you could rush them out of boot camp if we really need soldiers. Like for the medical field, you can't rush them through the process of learning because they need to know the knowledge. Otherwise, they're not going to be any help at all, regardless. Like they're just going to be bodies taking space. I mean, yeah, some of them may learn on the go real fast, but some of them are not going to. That's just simple facts. It's a complicated field.
It
I
is,
mean,
and there's no real shortcuts. I think people looking at building hospitals are incredibly expensive. Adding new hospital beds is incredibly expensive. I think coming up with new ways of delivering care. I think now there's a comfort level that's developed with virtual care. There are a lot of uh, specialties in medicine that the majority of their visits are now virtual. For instance, psychiatry has become largely virtual. You really need to go to a psychiatrist's office to be seen. Same with psychology, endocrinology. A lot of these, there's been a lot of innovation on how you can leverage technology to provide care to people in settings that are more manageable.
yeah, I mean, virtual visits did become very accessible. They became very made the process easy. I mean, I was actually going through the process of trying to get gastric bypass surgery done when COVID hit, and my whole path, that 9 month, year long path of different appointments to get to that, ended up being mostly virtual because, bam, the first and then it actually delayed my surgery by like a year and a half because they weren't operating on cosmetic surgeries like that. But it just but the virtual appointments were interesting. It was a lot easier just to sit at your house on your cell phone and talk to them for a half hour and be done. No driving back and forth to the appointment. No sitting in the waiting room waiting. Like it was convenient. It was convenient and not as time consuming as it usually would be to go to the doctor for a simple fast visit.
Well, it was convenient and efficient, and it worked. I think for years the insurance companies wouldn't pay for it. They didn't. They were afraid it would be abused, and they didn't know what the value was. But I think if you look at what silver linings came about from the pandemic, it's the realization that we can harness technology to better serve patients. Even during the pandemic, when patients were unable to see their loved ones, they were in isolation. They started using iPads to allow patients to see and talk with their family members, which I can tell you from my own experience was very, very important in surviving what I went through. It's terrifying when you're on life support. You can hear what's going on around you. You know you're in trouble, but nobody's really talking to you. No familiar voices, explaining what's going on. So I think, for me, my hospitalization was, before the pandemic. So my family was able to visit me, and my wife was able to stay in the unit with me most of the time. So there's a huge benefit to having family and loved ones involved in your care. And the workaround during the pandemic was using iPads to facilitate the communication. So I think, the needs that exist will have to be solved by using technology differently and coming up with better ways to care for patients until the workforce can be replenished.
Do you think the day is finally upon us where we're going to get completely basically robot doctor machines where they can diagnose all this common ailments and just give out medication right out of the machine?
It's a good question. I think that AI, is going to be a very disruptive force, and that it once finally harnessed and perfected, it's probably going to improve efficiency just the way the assembly line produced efficiency, 100 years ago. It's going to make a lot of things that are time-consuming, tasks handled rapidly by the AI. And I think it has the potential for good, but I also think it has the potential for abuse, and it's going to have to be monitored very, very carefully. But I think if used, intelligently, and having people monitoring it for, to be certain that no moral or ethical boundaries are violated, potentially could, do a lot of good and improve much of the inefficiency we see.
I mean, yeah, it would have its ups and downs like any technology does. And yeah, I mean, there definitely could be some abuse of it if it's not, but I'm sure, as with everything, it would be guarded fully because they understand that. Same reason that all medicine cabinets in the hospital now are fully locked up, not just sitting in hallways like they used to back in the old days. I mean, it's just times change, and we have to change the security to make it match. Sadly.
Exactly. And I think it's just I think every advance has its potential abuses, and it has to be monitored to be certain that there are no untoward bad effects that occur.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what it would be. So, how? Because in your book, I glanced at it. I read parts of it I could read online a little bit today, and you actually have a good balance of the medical part of it and the narrative. How did you make that balance out? I mean, a lot of authors I've read have trouble doing that. They either make it too medical or they leave medicine completely out of it when they write a book about a medical scenario.
That's an excellent question. I think it's what makes my book so unique. Having had a firsthand view of what it's like to be a patient and to be totally out of control, have no control over my situation, and to trust in other people completely, forced me to really begin to view what being a patient is like from a totally different perspective. I can tell you, being a patient is much harder than being a physician. But having lived in both, for 2 years, lived in both worlds, I really developed insight into things that I really didn't fully comprehend before.
Yeah, I mean, it is different because as a patient, you don't have the answers. A physician usually at least has some idea in their head of what's going on the second they read the chart. There's usually like at least a couple guesses of what could be going on. From a patient's perspective, I mean, it's just sitting and waiting, and that's the worst part is the waiting to hear what it is that's happening. I mean, the ideas that run through your head in that scenario could go from mild to horrible, like because you're just picturing everything that you think could possibly be wrong with you. I mean, I've gone for pneumonia to the urgent care hospital, and I'm sitting there thinking like it's cancer, like like it's just your mind goes to the worst places when you're a patient sitting there waiting for them to come in. But
Absolutely, and I talk about that in my book. I go through strategies to help patients navigate that, and I try to normalize the process. And because when you're experiencing something that you can't even imagine, it's hard to know what normal is. And your mind can take you very dark places quickly.
it can. I mean, I have to imagine because I never really had a hospital stay that was even more than one night. So it's something I never experienced personally yet, thank God. But how do you deal with those emotions? The the fear, the hopelessness. How do you gain the resilience to keep fighting it?
Well, when I was on life support, um, I knew I had to keep my mind occupied. So I sang every song I could remember, recited every poem I could remember. And the times when I would get frustrated when I forget lines. And my brother was talking to me one night in the ICU, and he was talking about he was building a home, um, his dream home. And I said, that's something I can do. I can do that in my head. And, I remember reading, Viktor Frankl's work, and he talked about how it was the unique ability of people who could look to the future that were able to survive the unimaginable horrors of the concentration camp, of the sorrow of what they left behind. So it was really looking to the future. So I would plan trips. I built the house in my head and furnished it and built the gardens. It was a very active and engaging process, and it really helped keep me sane. But I also had to recognize, once I was recovering and I was on the road to getting stronger, that I had to deal with the post-traumatic stress that came from this illness. I had to work through that, and because my life was altered tremendously, in some ways forever, by the illness, and so I had to kind of figure out how to find meaning and purpose and happiness again. So it was a journey.
Sounds like it. And I gotta ask, of course, did you build that dream house, or did you take any of those trips that you were coming up with in your mind?
Took the trips, couldn't afford the dream house.
Oh, at least you got half of it. I
Yeah.
mean, always good to have a little something, but uh, So I gotta ask though, because this is a paranormal show to some degree. How how do you view the afterlife now that you went through all this? Like, what's your views in the afterlife?
You're the first person that's asked that question.
Really?
I don't fear death. I mean, I experienced a lot of death. My parents died when I was young. I experienced patients dying, but I was afraid of dying. Now, it really is not something I fear.
Is it? Do you? Is there a reason you don't fear it? Like, is there a particular reason, or is it just overall sense you get?
It was the totality of the experience, coming so close to death, and feeling my body drifting away into the dark void and becoming cold, and then having a very calming, warming presence took the fear away. So I guess we fear what we don't know the most, having come so close to being dead. A lot of the fear of that unknown is gone.
Well, I mean, see, I personally never really had too much of a fear of death because as that goes back to the fate destiny thing, like it's gonna happen when it's meant to happen. I don't think anything I really do can change that. Minus some like freak accident maybe, but I don't see anything I choose to do, like any life decisions I make are gonna change that. Like you're supposed to die when you're supposed to die. That's my beliefs. I mean, there's whether you want to call it a God or the universe or something. There's something out there that controls it all. Extraterrestrials, who knows? But I like to always throw that last one in there. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what controls it, but I feel like something's controlling when we actually are supposed to go.
I believe so. I think that for me there was a fear of death. Largely from my own lived experience of my parents dying when I was young, and it was very traumatic. And so my personal experience at a young age with that colored my thinking. But the actual proximity to being dead was really not as terrifying as I remembered it to be.
Well, that's a glorious thing. It really is. And I know we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to talk about how important it is to have people there for you when you're going through things like this, whether it be family, friends, just loved ones in general. Like, why do you think that holds such a healing property on humans, like that we have loved ones around?
I think it's a basic human need. I think the ability to love and to be loved is extremely precious and something to be treasured. And I think it's easy sometimes to take it for granted until you realize how important it is when you're going through something such as I did. But having my wife and my children, my friends present was life-saving and sanity-saving.
I mean, it's got. I feel like it has to be some kind of mental thing, like along the same lines as like serotonin or something, some kind of chemical in our brain that reacts to it. I mean, it's. I'm not versed enough in brain chemistry to actually answer that question in any way, but there's got to be some kind of chemical in our brain that kind of lights up when we're feeling loved by people, when we're feeling that people are caring about us, and what happens.
Well, absolutely. It's been shown with mothers of newborn babies, just having the baby, lay in the chest of the mother. There's a surge in oxytocin. There's chemicals that are released that really work on the brain to create a bond. And the bonds of friendship and love are powerful.
It's true. I mean, even at the times where you don't want to be around anybody, and like you keep telling people that you want to be alone. As soon as someone gets close enough to actually be with you for a while, like that feeling just goes away as much as you were fighting it. Like it just disappears slowly, and you realize you're happy someone's there, and it's kind of mystifying in a way. Why our thoughts lead us one way, but our brain chemistry leads us the opposite way. It's the enigma of being human, I guess. But
It is, and I said earlier, there are a lot of things that happen in life that can't be easily explained. And I think, having loved ones near you and close friends near you is has been correlated with living a longer life and a happier life.
I agree. I mean, I agree. Those who have loved ones around them constantly are always way happier than those who are living by themselves without connections to anybody. It's a sad truth, and that's why everybody should have somebody at least. But so, what would you say is the most important lesson that you learned through your whole experience? What was the most important lesson you took away from it all? If you had to pick one.
Great question. The value of the love and devotion that my wife and my children showed me, just being there for me, putting their whole lives on hold just to be there with me, to get me through it, was immeasurably comforting.
So, once again, it goes back to having those connections, having that love surround you like that. At the end of the day, really is what it is.
Absolutely. I think, we saw that during the pandemic when people were dying alone. It was horrible. Many of the nurses and doctors would stay after the shift was over just to sit with the patient, until they passed, because dying alone is horrible.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would be. Dying alone must be miserable. I mean, it makes sense though in a way, because all those people in those freak accidents like far out in nature, or when you die alone, it must be terrifying. It really must be just terrifying, especially if you're somewhere you really don't know.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
So, what do you hope that readers of your book will walk away with it from? What do you hope they get from it?
My hope is that the strategies that I put forward that helped me as a patient to survive and recover, that they're not complicated, that anybody can use them, and they will help you get through the unimaginable, even when the road forward is not clear. It'll give you the strength to find a way.
Well, there you go, folks. That's the lesson to walk away with it from. And what is the name of your book? You haven't said yet, and I'd love to actually have people hear the name.
Sure. The name of the book is Physician, Heal Thyself, Nearly Dead, and the Journey Back to Health. It's available on Amazon.
And where can people find out more about you if they're interested in finding out more about your life, your studies?
My website is Acknowledge, Accept, Adapt, all lowercase, one word, no spacing.
I like that. Acknowledge, accept, adapt. I like that. That's actually just a good phrase for life. I mean, it really is. But I want to thank you for coming on, Michael. It's been fascinating to hear your story, and it's been fascinating to hear all the lessons you learned. And I always like talking about the medical community. I didn't want to get into health insurance because that's a whole topic I try to stay away from because I'm gonna flip. I don't like the way health insurance works in America, but a lot of people don't. So I don't
think anybody likes it.
No. Well, okay, except the people running the companies, they may like it, but I want to thank you for coming on. It's been an enlightening show. And to all my listeners, you know where you can find me. If you don't, just shame. Shame, but it's all in the outro. Check that. You'll hear it there. And I will be back Wednesday and Thursday this week, and I think maybe Saturday too, with interviews for you guys. So don't worry, the week's still got plenty to go. And until next time, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. I will see you in a couple days.
Thank you very much.